The last message I ever got from my brother didn't come with anger or emotion. It came cold, precise, and final. Don't show up to Dad's birthday. You're a disgrace to this family. I'll have security remove you. I stared at my phone long after the screen went dark, realizing this wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. Before the story goes any further, take a moment to support this channel. If stories about resilience, ambition, and proving people wrong resonate with you, subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're watching from. It helps more people find stories like this one. The party was being held at North Shore Crest Club, the kind of place where old fortunes gathered to remind each other they still mattered. Chicago's elite would be there, bankers, lobbyists, executives pretending not to measure each other by net worth. According to my brother Evan and his wife, Claire, I didn't fit the image. I was a liability. All because 5 years earlier, I'd said no. Our family business, Hawthorne Automotive, had once been a powerhouse. When I graduated with my engineering degree, they offered me a corner office, a generous salary, and a title designed to impress shareholders. They called it opportunity. I called it a cage. They didn't want my ideas. They wanted my last name. They wanted me polished, compliant, and silent. So I walked away. That decision branded me a failure in their eyes. They told relatives I was confused, stubborn, wasting my potential. What they didn't know was that I'd already chosen a different name, my mother's maiden name, and started over quietly. The framed magazine cover on my office wall didn't say Hawthorne. It said Elena Brooks, one of the most promising innovators in energy storage under 40. The article didn't mention that Voltason, the battery company reshaping the EV industry, was mine. Or that the CEO Hawthorne Automotive had been desperately trying to court for months was the same daughter they'd uninvited from a birthday party. 5 years earlier, I'd left their headquarters carrying nothing but a backpack full of sketches and a conviction they laughed at. My father told me real value was built in boardrooms, not workshops. He never looked at my designs. Never asked why I believed solid-state lithium composites would outperform traditional cells. He saw rebellion, not vision. I rented a studio apartment and turned it into a lab. I repaired electric scooters to pay for materials, slept next to humming prototypes, and worked through failures no one ever saw. When people talk about success, they imagine applause. Mine began in silence. My mother had died when I was 19, but before she did, she gave me a small crescent moon pendant and told me something I never forgot. When everyone tells you the safe path, listen to the one that scares you. That's usually where the truth lives. Slowly, the world started listening. A small investor, then a research grant, then a call from a professor who remembered my work. Voltason was born, and within 2 years, our battery systems outperformed anything on the market. We sold quietly, letting larger brands take credit. I wanted success without my family's shadow. Meanwhile, Hawthorne Automotive refused to adapt. They dismissed EVs as trends, clung to tradition, and bled market share. By the time they realized they needed innovation, it was already slipping through their fingers. Their largest investor wanted a partnership with Voltason. One condition: I had to present it myself at my father's birthday party. The night of the event, I arrived alone. No entourage, just a simple black dress, and my mother's pendant resting against my collarbone. The valet checked my name twice. "Miss Brooks," I confirmed. Inside, the room glowed with chandeliers and champagne. Gold balloons spelled out my father's name. I didn't come for attention. I came for one man, Richard Lowell, CEO of Lowell Capital. Claire spotted me first. Panic flashed across her face as she flipped through her clipboard. "You're not on the list," she said. "I am," I replied calmly. "Check again." Her hands trembled as she read, "You're here at Mr. Lowell's request." I walked past her before she could speak. Evan saw me seconds later and stormed over. "What part of stay away didn't you understand?" "You've got about a minute," I said, checking my watch, "before Richard arrives." He scoffed until the doors opened. The room fell silent as Richard Lowell stepped in. My father rushed forward, smiling broadly. Richard shook his hand, then looked past him. His eyes landed on me. "There she is," he said clearly. "Ms. Brooks. A pleasure to finally meet you." The silence was absolute. My father turned. Evan froze. Claire dropped her glass. Richard walked toward me, smiling. Your work is redefining energy storage. Frankly, the future of this industry. My father's voice shook. You know her. Richard raised an eyebrow. Know her? She's the reason I'm here. Elena Brooks is the founder and CEO of Voltason. The room lost its breath. Evan stared at me like I'd risen from the dead. You left. You disappeared. I built, I said evenly. Claire tried to interrupt, but Richard continued, almost amused. She built a company now valued at over $4 billion. The same company you've been trying to partner with. My father sat down hard. Voltason, that's you? I nodded. Every patent. Every breakthrough. Richard opened a folder. Lowell Capital will acquire a majority stake in Hawthorne Automotive, effective immediately. Elena will assume the role of CEO and lead the company's transition. My father whispered, I need time. We had time, I replied quietly. You just didn't listen. He signed. Applause followed, real, stunned applause. Evan left in silence. Claire followed. The people who once ignored me now leaned in, eager to be remembered. I wasn't there for them. I was there to reclaim what had always been mine. That night, standing on the terrace under the stars, my father admitted he'd been wrong. For the first time, he asked if he could learn from his daughter. Maybe the family we were was gone, but something stronger was beginning. And this time, it had my name on it. By the time the applause thinned into uneasy murmurs, the room had reorganized itself around me. People who hadn't noticed me 10 minutes earlier were suddenly close enough to smell my perfume, offering congratulations with the practiced warmth of professionals who knew when the tide had turned. I accepted their words politely, but my attention stayed fixed on my father. He remained seated, shoulders rounded, staring at the contract he had just signed as if it might rearrange itself into a different reality if he looked hard enough. Richard Lowell leaned in beside me. We'll keep the transition quiet tonight, he said. Tomorrow is when the real work starts. I nodded. Quiet suited me. I had never needed noise to validate progress. Across the room, Evan reappeared near the bar, jaw clenched, eyes burning. Claire hovered beside him, whispering urgently. Their posture was familiar, the stance of people used to leverage who had suddenly lost it. Evan caught my eye and took a step toward me, then stopped when he noticed Richard watching him with detached curiosity. For the first time in his life, Evan hesitated. I excused myself from a small circle of investors and stepped out onto the terrace again. The city lights shimmered below, distant and indifferent. For a few seconds, I let myself feel it. Not triumph, not revenge, but gravity. Decisions made years ago had finally landed. The door creaked. Evan followed me out. So this was the plan, he said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Show up and humiliate us. I didn't turn around. I didn't plan to humiliate anyone. I planned to present a solution. He scoffed. You always say that, like you're above it all. You walked away from us. I walked away from being dismissed, I replied calmly. There's a difference. You think you're better than us now, he snapped. I turned then. No, I think I was underestimated. For a moment, his anger flickered into something else. Fear, maybe. You could have told us, he said. You could have said you were building something. I shook my head. You never asked. The words landed harder than any accusation. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. Without another word, he went back inside. The next morning, I arrived at Hawthorne Automotive headquarters before sunrise. The building still smelled faintly of oil and old carpet, tradition clinging to the walls. A temporary badge waited at reception with my name printed beneath the title CEO. No Hawthorne attached. Employees paused as I passed, conversations trailing off. Some recognized me, most didn't. That was fine. Recognition wasn't the goal. Direction was. Craig. No. Evans. Office was empty, desk drawers cleared in a hurry. Claire's access badge had already been deactivated. In the executive conference room, Richard and the transition team were waiting, laptops open, faces serious. We've got 12 months, Richard said, tapping the screen. That's how long before the board expects visible transformation. Good, I replied. I won't need that long. We started with the obvious. Outdated production lines, stalled research, a culture allergic to risk. Engineers who had been ignored for years suddenly found themselves invited into conversations that mattered. I listened more than I spoke, asking questions no one had bothered to ask them before. By noon, my father knocked on my door. He looked smaller without the party lights, without the crowd. "You didn't have to do it like this," he said quietly. I gestured for him to sit. I didn't choose the timing. I chose the work. He nodded slowly. "I spent years thinking I was protecting the company." "You were protecting control," I said gently. "There's a difference." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was my mother's old sketchbook, the one I thought was lost years ago. I recognized her handwriting immediately. "I found it after you left," he said. "I didn't know how to give it back." My throat tightened. I took the book, running my thumb along the worn edge. "Thank you." That afternoon, news broke across the industry. Headlines didn't mention family drama. They mentioned strategy, innovation, survival. That was how I wanted it. By evening, messages flooded my phone. Former colleagues, distant relatives, people who suddenly remembered my birthday. I muted the notifications. Silence, I'd learned, wasn't absence. It was control. Later that week, I stood in the lab at Voltason's original facility, surrounded by engineers who'd been with me from the beginning. They watched me carefully, waiting to see if success had changed me. "We're expanding," I told them, "but we're not compromising. Not on ethics. Not on innovation." They nodded, relief clear on their faces. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my mother's sketchbook. On the last page, written in her careful script, were the words, "You don't need permission to become who you already are." For the first time in years, I slept without replaying old conversations in my head. The next chapter wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about building something that couldn't be ignored. The real resistance didn't come from the boardroom. It came from the middle, from managers who had survived decades by saying yes to the loudest voice in the room and no to anything that felt unfamiliar. They smiled in meetings, nodded at my plans, and then quietly delayed implementation. They were used to leadership as ceremony, not direction. I noticed it within the first 2 weeks. Production reports came in late. Pilot programs stalled without explanation. Emails were answered with polished vagueness. No one openly challenged me, but momentum slowed just enough to be dangerous. That was when I understood the second test of leadership, not vision but enforcement. I called a full operational review and requested every department head present their roadmap. No slides, no buzzwords, just numbers and deadlines. The room grew tense. People who had coasted for years suddenly found themselves exposed. One manager, a 20-year veteran, tried to deflect. "We've always done it this way," he said carefully. "Our clients expect consistency." "Our clients expect relevance," I replied. "Consistency without adaptation is decline." By the end of that week, 3 senior managers resigned. 2 were reassigned. A 4th was terminated for deliberately withholding data. The message spread faster than any memo ever could. This wasn't symbolic leadership. This was structural change. Outside the company, the narrative was shifting too. Analysts who had dismissed Hawthorne Automotive as a legacy brand began revising forecasts. EV forums buzzed with speculation. When Voltason Technology was officially announced as the backbone of Hawthorne's next-generation platform, the stock jumped 12% in a single afternoon. That was the day Evan called me. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again the next morning. And the next. On the 4th call, I answered. "You really did it," he said. No accusation this time. Just disbelief. "I said I would," I replied. There was a long pause. "I didn't know," he said finally, "about any of it." "I know," I said, "and I meant it." He exhaled. Claire left. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because his consequences were no longer my responsibility. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. I don't know how to be your brother now." "You start by listening," I said, "the way you never did before." We ended the call without resolution. That was progress. A week later, my father asked to join one of the engineering briefings. He sat quietly in the back, hands folded, watching as teams debated thermal thresholds and scalability. When someone asked a question he didn't understand, he didn't interrupt. He wrote it down. Afterward, he said, I used to think intelligence was loud. It doesn't need to be, I replied. At home, I finally unpacked the last box I'd carried with me for years. Old notebooks, failed prototypes, rejection letters. I didn't throw them away. I shelved them. Evidence of distance traveled. The company's new prototype rolled out under strict secrecy. When we tested it, the numbers exceeded projections. One of the junior engineers cried when the results came in. She told me no one had ever trusted her with something that mattered before. I told her, they will now. The night before the official announcement, I stood alone on the rooftop of the headquarters, city lights stretching endlessly in every direction. The same city that once treated me as invisible now pulsed with opportunity. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. The kind of steady that comes from knowing no one can take this from you, not because you're guarded, but because you earned it. Tomorrow, the world would know. And this time, I wouldn't be introduced as anyone's daughter. The announcement hit the market at exactly 9 a.m. No dramatic press conference. No sweeping promises. Just a clean release outlining the new direction, the technology shift, and the leadership structure. Analysts picked it apart within minutes. By noon, every major industry outlet had run the headline in some variation. Legacy automaker reinvents itself under new leadership. My name appeared without qualifiers. No mention of family. No backstory. Just results. Inside headquarters, the mood changed almost instantly. People walked differently. Straighter. Faster. Meetings started on time. Decisions were made without waiting for permission that no longer existed. The culture didn't transform because of speeches. It transformed because uncertainty had been replaced with clarity. That afternoon, my father asked if he could walk the floor with me. We moved past design bays and testing stations, past teams deep in conversation. No one stopped him. No one deferred. He noticed. I could see it in the way his shoulders shifted, how he adjusted to being just another person in the building. I used to think respect came with position, he said quietly. It comes with trust, I replied. He nodded. You earned theirs. Later that week, the board finalized the transition. I didn't attend the vote. I didn't need to. When Richard called to confirm it was unanimous, I simply said thank you and went back to work. Evan didn't come back. He sent a message instead. Short, restrained, apologetic without asking for anything. For the first time in our lives, the balance between us felt neutral. That was enough. Victoria never reached out. Neither did Claire. Their silence wasn't loss. It was relief. Months passed. The first new model prototype rolled off the line, quiet and efficient, built on technology that had once existed only in my notebooks. When we unveiled it, I stood off to the side, watching the engineers answer questions with confidence I recognized. Pride didn't swell in my chest. Something calmer did. Completion. One evening, long after the building had emptied, I returned to my office and found the crescent moon pendant resting on my desk. I hadn't taken it off, but seeing it there, catching the light, felt deliberate, like a reminder placed by someone who knew I might forget to look back and see how far I'd come. I held it for a moment, then placed it in the top drawer beside my mother's sketchbook. The company stabilized. Then it grew. Not explosively, not recklessly, but with intention. The kind of growth that lasts. And me. I stopped waiting for the past to catch up. Some stories end with applause. Mine ended with quiet authority, with doors opening not because someone recognized my last name, but because they couldn't ignore the work behind it. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or written out, remember this. Being overlooked doesn't mean you're invisible. Sometimes it means you're being given space to build without interference. If you believe in that kind of quiet strength, support the channel by subscribing, sharing the story, and leaving a comment below. Someone else needs to hear that their moment isn't gone, it's just waiting.